Hey, Wolverines. Welcome back to the Wolverine Buzz podcast. I'm here with another special Senate candidate update for y'all. And today we have a very special guest. We have Mr. Case Lawrence. Mr. Lawrence, it's good to be with you here today.
Good to be here.
Awesome.
Thanks.
You want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, my name is Case Lawrence. I'm running for the House of Representatives in Utah's 3rd District. I come to this from a life of entrepreneurship in the private sector. I've spent the last 13 years building a business in the indoor entertainment space called Sky Zone, originally called Circus Tricks. And we are the largest indoor operator, owner, franchisor of trampoline parks in the world. We have over 300 facilities across the world. And I come from that private sector background. This is my first office I've ever run for. I've never run for elected office before.
So what spurred that decision for you?
Yeah.
Because I feel like the first ad I ever saw was online. I saw a YouTube ad. And was it for the House of Representatives or for the Senate?
House of Representatives.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, 3rd District House.
And so with that, what made that decision for you? What made you want to get into politics?
Yeah. You know, I've always closely followed policy. I've always thought that there might be an opportunity at some point. But a couple things. One is I'm at a place in my career and my family where I can do something like this. And second, I am moved and motivated by the dysfunction in our country, especially in Washington, D.C. And, you know, I believe in the nobility of elected office as a way to give back. This is my way to give back. And I think I bring some skills and experience and perspective that are unique and that can make a particular impact in this role and in Washington, D.C.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so with that, I mean, when I first saw your campaign ads, I mean, it seems like it's almost with John Curtis retiring and everything.
Yeah.
Like, well, not retiring, running for the Senate.
Running for the Senate, yeah.
With that, it seems like it's almost late in the game here. So with that, what's your main strategy for, I mean, getting your message out? And what is it something that, above all else, what do you want something that voters want? What do you want voters to know first and foremost about you?
Great question. So I have, throughout my career, I've been on the front lines of every major economic crisis of our generation. So first, the tech crisis back in the early aughts. I was actually coming out of Silicon Valley at that time, working in Silicon Valley. I saw that, dealt with that. The real estate crisis and recession and the financial crisis in 07, 08, 09, I was hit hard by that. I was developing real estate, had kind of started a company in the real estate industry that ran into a buzzsaw with the Great Recession, came to a disappointing end. It was out of the ashes of that disappointment that I started Circus Tricks, now Sky Zone, now grown that to over 5,000 employees, over 300 facilities. And then COVID. Our company was hit square in the mouth during COVID. We had to shut down all of our facilities for
Especially
an average.
entertainment, right?
Yeah, for consumer entertainment. We were shut down on average. It was different for each store, but on average about 7.5 months for every single store. So in all of those situations, I've learned to entrepreneur through it, to get creative, solve problems, and work through it, be resilient. And we have some big problems in our country. And I think that it's time for people who've solved problems in the real world, in real life, difficult, moving part situations, to take those skills to Washington. And increasingly, people don't want to do that. We're losing our ethic of public service as a way for our best and brightest to give back. And I'm hoping with my candidacy to go against upstream on that, I guess, and bring that. So those are a couple of the things. I also feel passionately about several issues and about the dysfunction in our country, and so I'm sure we can get into those.
Oh yeah, trust me, we will be. This is something I always love asking candidates for public office. I mean, we've been doing coverage of the Senate campaign, and now with you, we're doing coverage of the 3rd Congressional District.
Yeah.
I always love asking candidates this. I mean, you're running for, and you're an outsider. This is your first congressional office you've ever ran for.
Yeah.
When it comes to the Congress, I mean, we've seen the dysfunction. I mean, if you turn on C-SPAN, you could see votes going either which way.
Yeah.
What is your strategy to actually get legislation passed? Because it's not just you in the House. You have 434 other representatives, right, to basically negotiate with. You got 100 other senators in the Senate.
Yeah.
What is your plan to get things passed? How are you going to work with your colleagues in the House and the Senate?
Yeah. Well, you hit upon it exactly. The strategy is completely different than if you're running to be an executive of something or to govern something or to have executive authority. This is to be a representative, to be part of a team. And as Republicans, we have got to be smarter team players. We've learned that over this past year, that the way to get things done is to be a smart team. And I think we've really, frankly, we've not done well on that in many instances over the past year and even beyond. So to me, one of the big elements of this where you can be effective is to be a leader, to be have the credibility and the leadership to get in and put people together to get things done. And that comes down again to the quality and the type of people we're sending back there.
Absolutely. Yeah. When it comes to, especially when we saw, Mitch McConnell just said today that he's going to be stepping down.
Yeah.
At least with the leadership in the House, we've seen how, you saw with McCarthy, how he got ousted and things of that nature. Does that sort of environment, what in the business world has prepared you for maybe getting it in deep when it comes to the political arena?
Yeah, no, I think that is actually a great example about where we need to be smarter team players. And in the business world, you're judged by results. It's all about results. And sometimes, especially in today's world, our political arena has become more focused on performative politics and being back there to raise money, to posture for the next election, to drive social media populations. And I have no interest in any of that. I'm going to go back there and get things done and work with conservatives and anyone willing to work together to get good policy put through. So to me, it's a big part of it is having the right motives and being able to put aside lower motives to go back there and lead and inspire others to get behind you and not be afraid to put yourself out there. One aspect of this as well is, I come from a place where I don't need this. I don't need this career-wise. I don't need it financially. I don't need it from any perspective. And I truly think that's important to go back there with a sense of independence and with a sense of being willing to take risks.
Right, definitely.
So many people are not. And I think my whole career has been about taking risks, and I plan on doing that as well in Washington, D.C.
Especially when you're saying, you'll work with everybody. It seems like that's almost foreign now.
Yeah. It is. But it's the number one thing. We have got to be smarter team players there. There's just no question.
And so when it comes to working, I guess, with someone who fervently disagrees with you, what's your philosophy on that? I'm sure in the business world you've faced opposition like that before.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that?
Yeah.
How do you come into a room, make a deal, and say, you know what? I want us to be on board with this.
Yeah.
How can we do that?
Yeah. Well, I love that question, because in the business world, you don't always get to pick your business partners. In fact, rarely do you. You can pick a lot of times if you're a CEO or a founder, you pick your team, you pick your employees, but you're interacting with all sorts of different parties, and you don't get to pick who those people are or what their beliefs are or what their objectives are. Everyone comes at it with different objectives. But in the business world, you work together and you find ways to work together to advance interests. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to advance the interests of the Utah 3rd District, advance the interests of the conservative movement generally in this country. And I'm willing to work with others and do whatever it takes to do that. And that's where I think is a big difference between someone coming from a career in politics as opposed to coming from a career getting things done in the real world. It's important.
And so with that, I feel like we're in a perfect situation right now to talk about the country's finances.
Yeah.
Right. And I feel like being a business owner, you're going to like this first question.
Yeah.
So let's jump into policy. Right now, we're currently dealing with a possible government shutdown. Right now, it seems Washington can't pass the appropriation bills that they need to actually fund the government. And I remember back when I was younger, and I've mentioned this in every interview we've done, that my first article in high school, like as a student journalist, was how the national debt has passed $20 trillion. And to give that context, it's almost $34 trillion now. Yeah. And that wasn't that long ago. That was back in 2016, 2017.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to, heck, not even then, it was 2018. Yeah. It's not that long ago. So when it comes to the national debt, when it comes to, and since you're running for the House, you'd be in the
purse
chamber, right? You have power of the purse.
Yeah.
What is the problem? What do you see as the problem with how our finances are working in the country?
Two things. One is, first of all, to take a step back, is the actual approach to debt. Like we've had an element of national debt going all the way back to the earliest years of our country. But the whole approach to debt was different. It was something to draw upon in unique situations, times of war, times of unique catastrophe, and the idea was it was to be drawn upon minimally and only in emergencies. Now we've come to this paradigm where people believe that there's nothing wrong with debt, and we're using debt to actually fund operating costs and ongoing budget things. So we've got to get away from that. We've got to we really have to step back. Look, everyone in America, every family, every small business knows how to balance a budget. Part of how you do that successfully in a business or in a family is have a good process behind what you're doing to achieve that. And one of the other big problems in the House specifically is we've gotten away from process. We've gotten away from what's called regular order, where 12 separate budgets are originated in the House where it's supposed to originate. Those budgets are fleshed out by committees, debated, researched, and then filtered up into a budget that has seen thorough analysis. And then that's when you can make real progress at cutting into that budget. Priorities have already been debated and so on. We have gotten away from regular order in a big way. And right now we're managing by continuing resolution. And what that really means is let's just take what we did last year, take part and parcel all of the assumptions that went into last year's budget, and let's just start there instead and then move that forward instead of really doing the work to wrestle with priorities and have debates about spending priorities. So to me, the number one thing we need to do is get back to that regular order first and foremost. And both parties are to blame there, and I think that's where leadership, credible leadership from people who've done that in the private sector is going to help at least lead others to that same conclusion.
With balancing the budget, for example. I mean, when it comes to the different things that are in the budget, they're often very sought after and very fought over. I mean, Lord forbid you cut this because XYZ is going to be mad about that. If you fund this, XYZ is going to be mad about that because it's taken from this. Do you think that America is addicted to deficit spending? And if it is, how do you battle the special interests?
Yes. In short, I think very clearly it is. And that goes back to that paradigm problem we have, of we need to remember that even though the scale of government is at a different level than a family or small business, the principles are the same. And debt needs to be pushed back into a qualitative understanding of what it's for, and that it's time for emergencies and times of crisis in this country. So we are addicted, and that's going to be the problem. The reality is that reality is going to force that change of paradigm upon us. We have coming like a freight train at us. Both Medicare and Social Security are slated to go bankrupt. Medicare in 2032. There's some debate, 2031 possibly, and Social Security in 2033. And that's unfortunate, but the reality is those events and the realities of those of those things going into crisis are going to force these issues upon the country and upon smart people. And so I'm hoping that the magnitude and the proximity of that crisis are going to force some thoughtful debate on getting our fiscal house in order.
Do you think it's possible to balance the budget?
I think it is. I think it is because if you look at our economy as a whole, the intake, the revenue of the country through taxes is pretty stable. It's actually pretty darn stable over years, decades, and so on. The thing that's changed is spending. And, I'm all for some kind of legislation that would peg spending to a certain percentage of our revenue as a country. I think that would be a wise way to go.
Sort of like a balanced budget amendment.
Kind of a balanced budget, but I think not quite that far.
Right.
You pick 17%, for example, of you pick a percentage and you say this is what it's going to be, because the other reality here is that by the end of this year, just the interest that we're paying on the deficit is going to top $600 billion. Mm-hmm. By the end of the decade, it'll top $2 billion. It'll be the second largest expenditure from the budget. People forget that when interest rates go up like they have over the last couple of years, the national deficit is not all at once, but those bonds are cycling at now higher interest rates. And so the cost of servicing that debt is only going to get more expensive. Mm. So that's the other reality that's coming at us quick, or the cost of those yearly debt payments.
Absolutely.
So anyway, yeah.
And so going forward from here, it almost seems as though, like, say one Congress gets elected. Say you get elected,
yeah.
right? Representative Lawrence is in the House,
yeah.
right? You work hard, you get this passed. 2 years goes by, you're still in the House, but the House changed. Mm-hmm. And same thing with the Senate. New people get elected.
Yeah.
Presidency goes out, everything.
Yeah.
I mean, is it going to take a series of Congresses to get this solved? Or is it going to take a commitment from presidencies to get this solved?
It's going to take both. Here's why I'm holding out hope, actually, and that is that this is well known. We are turning over a significant number of congresspeople this year. There are record retirements, record people leaving or running for other office. There are going to be more new congressmen in Congress than there have been in a long time. In the Republican caucus, there's going to be more new Republicans in the caucus, probably, depending on how things work out, than have been in many election cycles. I think that's an opportunity for new thinking and to build kind of new consensus back there. I'm hopeful of it. But a lot of it depends on the makeup of that Congress and also who's in the White House. So we've got to see what the dynamics are. But like I said earlier, you don't pick what those are. You try your best, but then you work within the matrix of what comes into being to try to move the interests of Utah, the interests of the 3rd District, move those forward. That's all you can do.
Moving on from finances, let's talk a little bit about education. So big issue here on campus. I mean, we got a bunch of students watching.
Yeah.
I mean, right now we have President Biden trying to cancel student debt.
Yes.
Right. Seemingly, it seems almost against the Supreme Court's wishes.
Yeah.
When it comes to the student debt crisis, what is your take on that? Do you think that perhaps the loaners went too far? Do you think that there should be a debt cancellation? What is your take on that?
First of all, this goes back to our discussion previously, actually, about debt and the perception that debt is fine or that it's harmless. We cannot be going around forgiving debt, frankly, and let's be honest about what this is with President Biden, as a bribe to young voters. That's what he's trying to do, is bribe a certain segment of the electorate. And I think that's wrong. I think it's illegal. Supreme Court has said the same. I think most of these other efforts to eliminate student debt by executive fiat are going to prove to be illegal, and as they play their way through the courts. So not only is it just wrong from a principle and ethical basis to forgive one group's debt as opposed to others in this country who have not taken on the same student debt, it's wrong. It's also impractical, and that's why I think it's cynical by the Biden administration, because they know it's illegal. It's ultimately going to be ruled such. So to do that, to me, is a cynical, frankly, a bribe for votes. And I think that needs to go, that can't happen. Now, let's take on the other. The answer is yes. The price of education has just gotten out of control in this country. Institutions of higher education have gone along with that and fed that, and they probably bear responsibility for some of that. Universities, at the end of the day, are businesses. and they need to be run more like a business based on demand and results and outcomes. And what we have is we've got a bunch of degrees and a bunch of students in this country chasing degrees that don't lead to jobs, that don't lead to employment. And we need to get back on a track where each university is held accountable for their results at both providing programs that students really need and will lead to successful and sustainable careers, and then being honest about how they staff and resource those to provide them at a reasonable price. Mm-hmm. Because they have taken advantage of free debt money and to kind of build up bureaucracies that are unsustainable. And I worry that higher education is the next bubble in this country to burst. And I hear it even as I talk to students all over. So many more students are opting away from higher education into more job skills training and other things that are much more practical, where there's a very clear ROI and a reasonable price tag. Mm-hmm. So a lot we could talk about there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it almost seems as though, I mean, you mentioned how it seems as though President Biden is trying to bribe young voters with this.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think that possibly that a lot of these, and also you mentioned institutions, I mean, just wanting debt money.
Yeah.
Do you think that has a lot to do with as well with like public institutions as opposed to private institutions? Do you think they're both sort of trying to game the system?
Yeah, I think they both are, because they both compete with each other for students. They both compete. Even private public universities are still competing for revenue among customers, i.e. students. They're competing for grant funds, competing for really all the same things with the government. And so to me, the dynamics there are really the same. Certainly the public universities are subsidized more transparently by the government. But even the private institutions, if students have free access to dollars for education that does not justify itself in ROI, that is lending itself, whether it's private or public, to bad outcomes.
Definitely. You know? And so going forward from here, what is the number one thing that you think that universities ought to be doing when it comes to conserving? I mean, here at UVU, we just barely had our tuition hearing about basically tuition might be going up 2.4 to about 4.5%.
Yeah.
It's about another extra $200 the students are going to have to be paying. Student fees are going up.
Yeah.
And a lot of this had to do with Governor Cox's order to freeze tuition.
Yeah.
Last year, he's like, freeze tuition. All these organizations on campus are like, okay, but we've grown, so how can we? Oh, but just keep your budgets there.
Yeah.
And so, do you think that some past decisions have been very detrimental to what the current state of Utah higher education is?
There's definitely been a kicking of the can down the road. Now, true, like everything, there's been a lot of inflation, and UVU has to deal with that inflation in the services they provide, certainly to their employees and others as well. And so I don't begrudge that. I mean, that's a reality they need to deal with. But yeah, I think we're talking about when we talk about this crisis or this bubble in higher education, that goes back decades now, and it's from the can being kicked down the road from long ago. So it's not going to get solved overnight. But look, that's $200. Was it a semester? Or
if it raises to 4.5%, it's like a range between like $69 to $269.
Yeah. Look, that's a lot of money for a student trying to balance a budget and get by, and
that's book budget.
That's book budget right there. So it's significant, and I think it's just illustrative of this whole problem, and it's one thing if people are making those sacrifices to cover that extra $200 if they know they're going to be able to leave and get a good job. Mm-hmm. And so that's the tragedy, is when people are having that kind of faith, making those kinds of sacrifices, and then get out and find out that, my cinematography degree is not hiring, and
no shade towards cinematography.
No shade to cinematography. I just pulled that out of the air. But the point is, they haven't been given realistic expectations about what the job market is coming out with a degree in certain things.
Oh, I get that. I'm a poli-sci major, brother. I know.
I was too.
Yeah, so. See, there you go. You get it. I mean,
I went to law school, so yeah.
Oh, so you get that. I mean, I'm unemployed. I do politics on the side. You know what I mean? That's just how it works. That's where I want to go to is law school.
Yeah.
And so, moving on from that, I guess what's something you would offer to students? I mean, you're a successful businessman.
Yeah.
What would you say to students who maybe get into that situation who, I mean, are trying to dig themselves out? What's something that worked for you when you were in that state?
Yeah. There's no easy solution for people who are already in that position. We need to create jobs. We need to create jobs that can be accessed by people right out of school. And so that's why we need a growing economy. We need new jobs added to the economy, and that's a whole that's important in its own right. But yeah, I think it's hard to remedy the inefficiencies and the getting behind that can come from getting a degree that's unemployable or less employable. So I don't really have a great solution other than trying to go back. We need to fix it for those coming ahead.
Patch the leak as it
we
were.
need to fix and adapt and change that way. So I need to think maybe a little harder about what we could do for those students who are facing that already, who've graduated and now can't find a job, or they can find a job, but it's just not going to pay enough to sustain the student loans exactly. You
take out loans for $80,000 and you got a job that pays you $30,000. It's not going to be Yeah.
And that goes back to the question, why are we letting them do that? If we know that they're not going to be able to get a job to do that, why are we, if I'm a business and I go to get a loan at the bank, the whole analysis they're going to go through on the bank side is seeing if I'm going to have the potential to pay that back. If my business cash flow is such that it'd be able to pay the loan back.
And everything. Yeah.
That's not happening. And I think that's really a disservice, both from those issuing the loans, i.e. the government in this case, and the universities who have no interest right now in making sure that those estimates and the things provided there to the government and to the students are efficient as long as they're getting paid. So there's a lot that needs to be fixed there in that system.
Moving on to our next topic. You're running in the 3rd Congressional District.
Yep.
Let's talk public lands.
Yeah.
I mean, Utah is a big state when it comes to public land issues. I mean, recently we had Bears Ears expand. There was a lot of controversy here recently when the National Monument was put into the Grand Canyon expansion. I mean, ranches are all over the place that are mad about that. What is your stance on public lands? What is something that you'd want to do, or at least see happen at the federal level, or perhaps the state level, to try to see if we can manage public lands better?
Great question. And it's important to Utah, maybe more than any other state. We have 65% of Utah's land is under federal control.
That's insane.
It's insane.
Yeah.
It's insane. And,
Just to put that for perspective for our viewers, that's 60% of the landmass that encompasses Utah.
Yeah.
That's owned by the federal government.
Yeah.
And so
it's the majority of the land. Going back to the Bears Ear issue, and this is important because Obama, when that was done, did so with authority from a legislation way back in 1906 called the Antiquities Act. Hadn't been used for a long time. It very obviously wasn't made for or applied to this specific situation of seizing seizing land on behalf of the federal government. And he did so in a really questionable move in regard to balance of powers. It was definitely a power grab for the executive branch. Congress wasn't involved at all in that. And the whole use of the Antiquities Act is to basically bypass Congress and go around Congress to seize land for the federal government. That's not good policy. Even if you're for Bears Ear being federalized, I don't know that anyone can really make an argument that that's good policy to just bypass Congress and let the president just have a grab bag of whatever he wants. So that's the first thing. Congress needs to shore up the process. We need to pass legislation to clarify and shore up the process that Congress needs to be involved in those deliberations.
Mm-hmm. And just to be clear, you say you're not necessarily for a repeal of the Antiquities Act. You maybe a reform of it?
Yeah, so I just don't think it should be used. It was never meant to be used in those situations. Right. It was creative use of executive power. Obama was looking for a guise, frankly, to go in and seize that land, and the Antiquities Act was used to do that. It's not meant for that. It's not good policy. It was meant to bypass Congress. So there needs to be change there in the process again. So that's the biggest thing. The other big issue right now, there was a proposal by Democrats, by the Biden administration, that would allow a federal a lease on federal lands that would take land out of what is currently multi-purpose use and would take it off, basically a conservation lease. And that sounds good in theory. The problem is it allows people from out of state, out of our country, to come and take land out of commission in Utah. And the spirit of how federal lands have always been used or should be used is multi-purpose, that they should be utilized for the health and well-being of the citizenry, and that includes, economic development reasons, energy production. What's becoming a much bigger issue and will be for the next couple of years is rare earth minerals. That we in Utah have a lot of rare earth minerals in our land, and we need to, consider that. But it really comes down to this for me. It's a federalism issue. People in the state, people closest to the land that we're talking about, are in the best position to make decisions about the highest and best use of that land.
Right.
Not bureaucrats in Washington, who have their own interests and their own agenda. So there are a lot of specific policies, but really that at the end of the day is the principle that we in Utah should have a much bigger say about how that land is used. People in the communities should have that say, and not Washington bureaucrats.
Going forward from there, I want to talk to you a little bit about currently the state of politics in Washington, especially when it comes to impeachment. And so right now there's an impeachment inquiry of President Biden.
Yeah.
And right now it seems it's very partisan.
Yeah.
We had Hunter Biden just testify on the Hill in a closed door meeting.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to, holding the president accountable, the impeachment efforts, what is your stances on that?
Yeah. Well, I think, let's be clear. Let's take a step back. Impeachment has been watered down over the last decade and more. And, it's unfortunate, but it has been watered down. And the problem is when you impeach for superficial reasons, you can't expect that the next party to get in there is not going to try to do the same thing. And that's what we have. That's what we have in Washington right now is just, the weaponization of our judicial system and of the impeachment process. And the natural result, any group of people in any organization or society across the world, it's the exact probable and natural outcome that each part, it's going to keep getting worse and worse because each partisan group is going to keep weaponizing to attack the other. And so I think we need to keep impeachment, for substantive matters. And one party impeaching someone from the other party for political reasons, it might be convenient, it might be expedient, but then look, the other party is going to be in power soon, and they're going to do the same thing. And that's what we've got now. We've got tit for tat,
right?
Both impeachments and, frankly, the weaponization of our justice system. And it's scary. It's really scary when you think about that. And I think hopefully wiser minds are going to prevail, and we're going to get wiser about how we're using impeachment, how we're using the justice system.
Absolutely,
because it's really a problem. That's really a problem. We need to have a blind justice system, and we ought to have a very high standard for impeachment.
And that, honestly, it's a topic that I'm very passionate about, just because, as a young person, I see what's going on in Congress, and I feel like, okay, one day I'm going to be handed this torch.
Yeah.
Or one day I'm going to be carrying it, and I just wonder what the state of it is going to be.
Yeah.
And so the question I want to ask you is this. I mean, when we see how impeachment is being used as a political weapon, same thing with the Justice Department, as you mentioned. Do you think this sort of negative attitude, the lack of civility, this very cutthroat nature that politics is sort of, I mean, in one way has always been, but now is sort of very polarized.
Yeah.
Do you think that this is more of a reflection of ourselves as a citizenry?
Yes, I think that's an insightful comment, because I think our culture I think social media has made our culture a lot more crass, a lot more confrontative and argumentative. And I think it's driven out a lot of the formalities and a lot of the courtesies that we give each other. Something about the anonymity and the ability to sit back and make jibes on social media. I think it's changed our whole approach toward discourse, and it's unfortunate. I think there is value in courtesy and in upholding certain levels of behavior in public discourse. It's important.
Absolutely.
We need to roll that back, for sure.
And when it comes to the state of the nomination process in the 3rd Congressional District, jump from polarization, right. Let's talk about your opponents now. When it comes to that, why should voters in the 3rd, I mean, because here's the thing, UVU is in the 3rd Congressional District. Right? You'll have 40,000 voters that are listening to this, right? When it comes to you yourself versus your opponents. I mean, we have Mike Kennedy in the race, the mayor of Roosevelt, all these different people. So why should they choose you over them? Being an outsider, right? They would criticize you saying, oh, you have no political experience.
Right,
Why should they choose you over them?
So I like to think about it, especially with an open seat like we have. There's not an incumbent, and you have literally 11 people who've pulled papers to run in this seat. So there's 11 of us running. I like to look at it as we are auditioning for this role, rather than even running against each other, especially not yet. We're all auditioning for this open seat, and that's how I choose to look at it. I think there are a lot of good people in this race, even outside of myself. I think I'm one of them, but I think there are others too. I think there's some really good people. And so it really comes down to, what does this district need in this role at this time? And I'm holding myself out there saying, I think that we need to have an option here of someone who's been in the private sector and done things in the real world and is a political outsider. There are plenty of people in this race who've over 40 years of elected office in different state and local offices. And if voters think that's what is this district needs, then that's certainly their prerogative. I'm trying to offer a different lane and a different perspective and different experience to it that way. So I think that's the biggest thing is I have different perspective and life experiences coming from the private sector. When it comes to ideology and philosophy, I'm a lifelong classic conservative who believes in free markets, strong families, who believes in Reagan conservative principles, and I always have been, and nothing is going to change me in that regard. That's the philosophy I'm bringing to Washington. So I'm a rock rib conservative who will bring those politics to Washington D.C., as are others in this race, I think. But I come from a life of experience. It's a lot different.
Absolutely.
And so I think that's important in today's Congress.
Especially with this current state of the presidential race. I mean, that always makes a congressional race more interesting, right? You'll have someone on the top of the ticket being whoever it might be. Matter of fact, we just had Nikki Haley on campus.
That's right.
Doing a campaign rally for it. Make sure you watch our coverage of that. Sorry.
Did you guys yourselves go?
Yes, we did. I was this close to Nikki Haley, and I was like, whoa, okay. The more interviews I do like this, the more I've done stuff like this, like interviewed people, met these big time people I see on TV. I've come to realize something. They're not really giants. They're just people, right? And that's the cool thing about it.
I bet that's great.
But moving forward from that, in terms of the state of the presidential race,
yeah.
I mean, right now you have Nikki Haley battling out the nomination for President Trump.
Yeah.
It seems as though President Trump is going to pull out a win here.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that a name you want to be on the ballot with? Or are you cool with that? Or are you indifferent at all?
Yeah. Here's my answer to that. I mentioned earlier, as Republicans, if we've learned any lesson this last year in Congress and at all levels, is that we need to be smarter team players. Donald Trump, as part of that, we need to support the Republican nominee. And that's what I've committed to do. And as we sit here today, Donald Trump is, I think we can safely say, the presumptive nominee. As such, I think we need to support him. Look, there's a lot about Donald Trump that I don't like. I don't like his antics and behavior in many instances. But I'm a strong leader, and I will call that out. I'm strong enough to call that out when I see it, and I'm not afraid to do that. There's also a lot to love about Donald Trump that we all are familiar with. One is we know he's no squish. We know he cannot be pushed over by the left. I think all of us have come to appreciate that about him, especially all of us conservatives and Republicans. So at this point, the answer is to be smart team players. We need to rally around and go to war with the team we have. And I know if Donald Trump is elected, I can work with him. The Congress can work with him to get good things done in the House of Representatives. So, yeah, that's kind of how I see it. Now, if something were to change and Nikki Haley were to win the nominations, not looking likely, I would gladly support her as well, and I think she could do a great job as well, and we could win and get things done with her too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Lawrence, I want to say thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. You're a very informed and insightful interviewer. I could tell you know your subject matter.
I appreciate that. God bless you. I want to give you a minute. Just plug whatever you want.
Okay.
What do you want? Again, we have 44,000 potential voters out there who are hearing your message right now. What is it they want out of everything we've talked about in this interview? What do you want to leave them with?
I want them to know that I am a problem solver and someone who's gotten things done in the real world, and that I will go to Washington and represent the 3rd District well on the national stage. I will be not just a representative, I will be a leader among other representatives to get things done. And I can commit that to them. The other thing we haven't talked about, though, I just want to mention since you're giving me a little free time.
Absolutely.
The one issue that really needs to be mentioned is the border. Like, we've got a national emergency, and I approach this kind of from the business side going, this is an operational failure, and it would be for any organization, like not just government, any organization that had an operational failure as bad as what we're doing on the border, they'd be out of business. The executives would be fired, and it would be unacceptable. And we've got literally the leading cause of death in this country right now between 18 and 45. That's 40,000 UVU students fall in that category, is fentanyl overdose. That is a direct result, an unacceptable and direct result of a absolutely unenforced border. We have to get control of that. We have, this last year, over 3.3 million people were encountered at the border. Remember, that's people that are encountered and seek amnesty. That doesn't even count the millions of other people who sneak across with coyotes and drug cartels that we never even know about. It's probably close to 7 million. So these numbers are huge. Say there's 7 million. That's larger than the city of Los Angeles are getting into this country. We have got, I don't care what, this is not a partisan issue. This is a national security issue. We also apprehended 159 people on the terror watch list last year trying to get across. 2 weeks ago, we had a huge group of Chinese people making their way, trying to get through on the southern border. So it's not just Mexicans anymore, Mexican nationals. It's people from all over the globe know that they can get in. That message is out there, and so there's no deterrence. It's by the way, incredibly cruel to people in these other countries who have no money, have no hope, and we're encouraging them to make this exodus and put their lives at risk to come
especially
across the
because
southern
been waiting
border.
in line for years. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, and that's so important. I'm glad you mentioned that, so I can emphasize that. Legal immigration is a bedrock principle of this country. Like, that's part of the American dream. We need to keep that alive. There's a right way to do it. We have important industries in this country that need skilled labor from all over the world. Let's do it with brains. Let's bring people in who can contribute and add value to key industries that we have, instead of just letting this haphazard, disorganized chaos. We need to get order at the border.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Lawrence, thanks again for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Guys,
thanks for my Constitution.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Plug for the Center for Constitutional Studies. We appreciate you guys. But guys, make sure you tune in next time for our coverage of the 3rd Congressional race. We appreciate you tuning in to the Wolverine Buzz. Thank you so much, and God bless you.